It's dance and it's contemporary. Gati Dance Forum has been doing pioneering work in nurturing contemporary dance. I am at their studio here in Delhi to get a bit of that action. I'm with Mandeep Rekhi, Managing Director, Gati Dance Forum. He's also an accomplished dancer and the force behind the organization. Hi Mandeep.
Hi Priya.
For our viewers, tell us, how do we recognize contemporary dance?
It's actually a really fun question, and I've been thinking about this through this whole last 7 years of running an organization that looks at supporting contemporary dance in the country and also as a maker of contemporary dance. And I think one of the ways to identify contemporary dance, well, one of the distinctions of contemporary dance is not to confuse it with a form, because it is not a form. So in some sense what you're looking for is not an evidence of a particular kind of form that makes it contemporary dance, but essentially a lens through which you think the work has been made. So in some sense contemporary is more a lens through which you look at your own body, look at the world around you, and how this particular body is located in that particular society and that relationship. But it's really the lens through which you look at dance rather than the form of dance itself, which is tricky. I'm not being very clear, but I think when you look at contemporary dance, one of the things that you immediately recognize it by is the question that it's asking of itself. When you look at contemporary dance, it's either asking itself a question about form or a question about how performance is represented. So it's always sort of posing a question about the body or performance or society at large.
Okay, and so everybody's lens would be different, but it would come within the format of contemporary dance.
So that's pretty much as wide as something like contemporary dance is and should be.
What made you people start Gati?
One of the biggest reasons why we thought about having a space that allowed lots of different kinds of practitioners from various different dance backgrounds could come together and have a conversation. Because in 2005, which is when I met Anusha, who's the founder of Gati Dance Forum, we really thought that there wasn't a space for conversation at all. There wasn't a space where you could discuss dance practice, critique each other's work.
But by this you mean dance practice as in both traditional and contemporary, or?
I guess right from the beginning for us the aim was to not entertain this binary at all between classical and contemporary, but just to look at dance practice through this really wide lens, to say that in the imagination of contemporary dance for a country like India, you can't not look at the traditional resources that are embedded in the subcontinent.
Because a lot of your dancers, or a lot of the dancers who do contemporary work, many of them must have trained in some form of classical dance. So this establishment here that we are in right now has been around for a while.
Anusha founded Gati in 2007. So now it's been around for about 7 to 8 years.
And one of the main things that Gati does is to provide a space, like you said, for conversation, and you also have space here which you let out for practice, isn't it? Is it because there was a dearth of such space that people come here?
Actually, back in at least back in 2005, we were rehearsing in living rooms. You know, so
Right.
we were in Anusha's living room, which is right next door, which is one half of Khoj now. And we found ourselves rehearsing in her living room and said, okay, what is this dance ecology in this country? There's no space, there's no audience, there's no money to make work.
Yeah.
There is no sense of fraternity, community. There is, you know, so you really felt like you could have made anything and you were making it into this vacuum. And there was no context to your practice at all. So that's one of the reasons why we said we need to have a space where we're it's a space to hold hands with practitioners from various backgrounds and be able to have some really sharp conversations about where dance practice is at in the country and multiple perspectives on this dance practice.
You talked about the fact that where is the audience? So do you feel that there's been a change in the number and the quality of audience in which is viewing contemporary dance now?
I think in a big way. From back in 2009 when we started our first residency, where we literally had to pull our parents and relatives in to say, please come in and watch contemporary dance, to now the third edition of Ignite that happened in January, which is a biennale dedicated to contemporary dance in the subcontinent. There's a huge difference, you know. So you have an entirely new generation that is interested in watching contemporary dance and engaging with all the conversations that contemporary dance is engaged in.
So do you think this increase in the number of audience has been partly because of some educational intervention?
I think it's a bit of both. In some sense, there has been a directed effort that initiatives like Ignite have made over the years to build a relationship between audience and contemporary dance through initiatives like Meet the Artist, have a conversation with the artist, as well as bringing in some slightly more accessible versions of contemporary dance, so that you sort of are handheld into this world of contemporary dance and aren't watching the most abstract thing possible on your first visit. But I think over time it's also been something that people have acquired a taste for. So first time you go in there, you're a little bit puzzled by it, but the second time you go there, you say, oh, you have a reference point. And the third time you go there, you're beginning to really engage with it comparatively, and also with some kind of context of having received something like this before.
You all have organized, like you said, several festivals and several residencies. What is it that you look for when you pick and choose?
One of the biggest things is to look at what kinds of questions that are being asked by practitioners of their own practice of dance, and to see that a festival program looks at a range of such questions. To say that there are people who are asking questions of the forms that they're trained in, people who are asking questions of about sexuality, gender. So that's something that we really do think about, to say what is the quality of these questions, and what do they really propose as ideas, is something that we look at when we look at curating the festival.
A little bit about your personal journey.
I started as a jazz dancer, actually.
With DanceWorks?
With DanceWorks at the age of 19. So before that, I literally just had wedding dance experience.
Achha.
And at 19, when I joined college, I realized that become honors wasn't going to do it for me. So I joined dance classes twice a week, and very soon, by the end of my graduation, I was fully sort of consumed by dance. And very soon I realized that actually performative kind of practice wasn't going to excite me for too long. So very soon,
I think you need to explain that to our audience. What do you mean by performative practice?
performative
Because
practice
even
is,
what you do now is performance.
yeah, but it's a particular kind of practice where your relationship with the audience is, and you're really sort of like throwing out one singular idea at an audience. Whereas, in some sense, what I was more and more interested in was how do you challenge this singular relationship with the audience, but how do you start inviting people in to watch, experience dance work in various different ways.
When you joined Gati, and there were many issues that you all were grappling with.
Yeah.
One was audience, one was the other was finance, the other was space. So, any interesting anecdotes about how you managed to tide over those times?
In the first year and a half, 2 years, it was really, for Anusha and me, it was really voluntary work. You know, we had very little else to do. I would
And
teach
who
a
was
class.
who was funding you then for your daily needs?
Nobody. So I would go and teach a few classes.
Okay.
I went back to DanceWorks to teach at that point.
Okay.
So I made a little bit of money from that. Anusha also taught a Bharatanatyam class, I think, for kids in the evening, but that's pretty much what we lived on. The rest of the time, those initial years were all about just meeting and beginning to have a conversation about where a fledgling organization like this could go, and what were the things that we could really do. And it was time for dreaming, really. It was about figuring out what the challenges of the field were.
When was the first big cachet of funds coming in, and how?
I think the first project that got us out of our comfort zone and got us looking for money was the Gati Summer Dance Residency in 2009, where I think there was a budget of about 5-6 lakh that we needed to raise from various different sources. So we went out there for the first time with proposals and started looking for money. But the first large bit of money that we had to look for was when we decided to do the first edition of Ignite. That's when we realized, okay, now we're looking at something like a 45-50 lakh festival. So that's when we really panicked, actually. At some point, a month before the festival, we were only halfway through meeting the budget. And at that point, we didn't even have the experience. In that department, we still don't. About how then to figure out how do you switch to plan B a month before the festival if you haven't got the money. And luckily, and this was really the turning point for us, we had Royal Norwegian Embassy. We went to them really asking them that we have a Norwegian artist represented at the festival, whether they would like to do a closing party for us. And they turned around and they said, okay, are you looking for money as well? And we said, yeah. And they literally just said, okay, how much do you need? So we got the rest of the money then from them to run the festival. And luckily for us, they really came back to us after the festival to say, we would like to give you institutional support for the next 3 years. And that's really when we began to imagine, okay, now we're secure for the next 3 years and we have an average amount of salary to live on. So this can really become a livelihood for us. And now how do we imagine this organization, and what are the various things that this organization should do?
So one of the very interesting things about Gati is the innovative project ideas that you all have. What goes into the creation of these ideas? I mean, how do you come up with these ideas? I know that contemporary dance, like you mentioned some time ago, was that you have issues of gender, you have issues of questioning your body. But there's a lot more also that you guys present in your festivals.
Yeah.
So where do these ideas come from, and how do you pick and choose?
I think the ideas actually for us, one comes from a particular kind of daydreaming, which we did a lot more of in the early years because we had more time. But in a lot of it also comes from looking at the field and see what the field needs. And by looking at the field, I mean looking at practitioners in our field to see, okay, what are these practitioners dealing with? What kinds of questions do they have? And hence, a lot of the projects come from conversations with practitioners in the ecology, actually.
One of the major challenges that you faced in running this place?
One of the major challenges was,
setting up this place.
first was money.
Yeah,
And
that
then,
of course you.
Then space. We started in a small basement in Nizamuddin East, and very soon we knew that we needed a bigger space. And we also.
Why was that? Because at that time a lot of people had started coming to you to use the space.
Also, we had various different projects, so which means that the team was beginning to get a little bit larger, and there the office space and the studio space were sort of in each other. So if there was someone using the studio, the office people had to close their ears to work.
Oh, I
And
see.
we really felt like we were in each other's faces all the time. So that was one. And two, also by this time we were quite clear that a very basic safe space for dance was the need of the hour. That a sprung floor which looks after the joints of a dancer's body was crucial, and it was the bare minimum that we had to give ourselves as practitioners of an art form, that we have to, if this is our material, then we have to honor it. So one of the first things when we decided to renovate this particular space, which was a photographer's studio, into a dance studio, was to look at getting a sprung floor.
Okay.
To say that's really the bare minimum, so that we don't injure ourselves and we can dance into our 40s and 50s rather than stopping dancing at the end of our 30s.
Okay. What are the other plans that you have for the future?
There are many exciting and daunting plans. One of them is an MA that we are writing in collaboration with Ambedkar University. So
In contemporary dance.
well, we're calling it sort of critical dance practice, and then look.
No, but critical dance practice, critical to what?
Critical dance practice, in some sense, really looking at, if you're looking at contemporary as a lens, not a form, then what kind of lens is it? And that's really where we're getting at, where that lens is of criticality, where this is a practice that is asking questions of itself and is self-reflexive.
You know, somewhere on your website I was reading that there is the definition of, or rather the parameters on which to contextualize contemporary dance. Now, setting those parameters is a tricky task.
Yeah.
So how are you people going about it?
It's tricky, and I think it's tricky, and each project in some sense looks at defining the parameter just a little bit differently, because it feels like there can't be a singular definition of contemporary dance, or what gets included in this conversation and what doesn't get included. So the book project that we have, which is now the book is going to be published by the end by early next year, has looked at dropping the word contemporary completely. To say, if you're looking at the field, contemporary is loaded with associations from the West. It's loaded with this kind of exclusivity space, where you're saying contemporary means not classical, not commercial, not all of those things. Then really to look at contemporary with a fresh lens. How do you drop contemporary altogether and begin to come up with vocabulary that can describe the field afresh and begin to shed this association that we have of a recently coined word, but coined in some other part of the world.
Right. All I can say is happy hunting for the right parameters,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there'll be lots more innovative work that's coming out of Gati.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mandeep, tell us a little bit about the making of this work that you just presented for us.
This is a piece I made 2 years ago. It's called A Male Ant Has Straight Antennae. And the idea that drove the making of this piece really was to look at the idea of masculinity through a really complex lens. How do you begin to complicate masculinity? So I looked at various different ways of looking at masculinity, look at it through stereotypical images, look at it through the idea of touch,
Okay.
look at it through the idea of games. And in all of this, my biggest question was, how do you begin to one, complicate this idea and get away from the singular perspective on masculinity, that there is only one kind of masculinity that's possible, but actually there are hundreds of versions of masculinity. And also the biggest thing was to really look at how all of these ideas, hundreds of ideas, are constructs.
You know, you've been exposed to so much of dance, so much of contemporary dance. What, according to you, would be a good piece of contemporary dance and a bad piece?
It's a difficult question, but I think you can answer it at various different levels. But I think from the perspective of an audience, I can say from my own perspective, what is it that I like watching?
Or what is it that you don't like watching?
What is it that I don't like watching? Actually, let's start there.
Yeah.
So what I don't like watching is a dance piece that very clearly communicates something to me too clearly, where it's sort of like representing an idea which can actually be communicated through a sentence to me. So then what the question I come back with is, why do I have to spend an hour watching something where really what was thrown out at me was done in the first 1 minute? So there, I mean, there's a whole lot of pieces that say the state of women in this country, you know, and something about that, and it becomes a singular statement. In the first 1 minute, you know what the maker's relationship with the subject is, and it ends there. And I feel like very clearly communicated, but I could have got an email about this or a little Facebook post. I don't know why I have to see an hour-long contemporary dance piece on this, because I feel like it's illustrative. And the other kind of contemporary dance that I know most people detest is where there's this insider's secret there, where the maker is working on something but no one really knows. Nothing gets communicated. You know, so all of it is in the maker's brain, and in some sense the maker is making it in isolation from how it's actually being read.
Okay.
So that's the other spectrum. the other
So you are
problematic
somewhere in
spectrum.
between.
What I like is somewhere in the middle where I get some clues, but
There are questions that remain
unanswered, and the joy of watching a performance is in the unfolding of an idea.
Mandeep Regi, the dancer, creative person, and Mandeep Regi, the manager of Gati. How do the two come together? And what's a day in the life of Mandeep Regi?
The two are sort of at some level kept separate, because right at the beginning of establishing Gati, Anusha and I were quite clear that people who run an organization like this, what we're trying to build is a community space for dance, a space for dance that has sort of a widespread subscription or ownership from the dance community, then the only way to do it is to keep your own work outside of the programming of the organization.
Right.
So that's something that we've stuck to till date, to keep your own work out. But at another level, because we've also decided to run an organization, I mean, it's the chicken and egg situation, but the fact is we were practitioners first, and we've identified over time that keeping a practice alive is key for us to enjoy this process of setting up structures for dance. Then both of these things actually inform each other anyway, where the fact that I'm a practicing artist informs directly my relationship with looking at how to structure a residency, what I feel like a practitioner goes through in the various phases of creation. And similarly, because I go through this whole process of watching 6 choreographers in the residency each year go through their own process of creation, it informs my practice directly. So when I come back to the studio to create work, all of those conversations that have happened over the year play right out, and you're sort of, in some sense, your ideas also get clarified, challenged, questioned as you do this job.
So here's to perfect balance then, Mandeep, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Priya.
This is one space where you really feel comfortable. It's an open space. Gati come up with such different projects, you know, where they're really trying out and trying to reach out and bring a lot of performers, artists to come in and perform. And they have created a platform where, so they come up with different projects where they have created a platform where a lot of all the enthusiasts, like dancers, want to create or want to perform. So they come, they give them space. So that way it's really fantastic. I really like this about Gati, that they are thinking constantly about how we can actually enhance the way the infrastructure for dancers, for performers.